Hi, I'm Karen Rice and welcome to my Watercolour YouTube channel. This is a quick do's and don'ts little video which I hope will help you, especially if you're a beginner in watercolour painting. If you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of my future videos. I've been teaching watercolour for about 28 years plus, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it. And one of the things that I have learned when I get beginners join my class is that they're not sure about the paper, what paper to use. And because we're using watercolour, it's a very wet medium. You can imagine putting lots of water onto a sheet of thin paper. It's going to really kind of buckle and almost fall apart. So this is very thin cartridge paper here, what I use for my printing, and you can see it's really thin. This is not the paper that you want to use for your watercolour painting, so don't use it. I'm just going to give you a little example here. I'm just using a large brush here with some Quinacridone gold. Already, look at that, it's just seeped all the way through. Not only is it buckled, but it actually cannot take a wash at all. So yes, you can't use cartridge paper, so we'll put that to one side, and yeah, not even another layer, it's not going to work. So this is actually a little sketchbook. It's a really cheapy little sketchbook. Now this can take about one layer of wet paint. It's quite nice for pen and wash, and this is a little sketch I did earlier. I've got a demonstration of this on YouTube if you're interested, and I'll put a link for this in the description below of these gorgeous little cornflowers here. I'm really applying a lot of watery paint here, really putting this little sketchbook through its paces and just mixing up a bit of blue and yellow for green here to paint the stems and the foliage here, wet on dry as well. It's a fun one to do this actually. It's a nice one, especially if you're a beginner. I definitely check out this little tutorial. I'll have a link for this in the description below. Or even have a go at this little sketch here. It's really nice to do, and you could do this on watercolour paper as well, or in your sketchbooks, which I really encourage you to use if you are beginners. So as you can see here, I'm just having no trouble really applying the paint. There's no texture on this sketchbook. It's quite smooth paper, but it's quite nice for something like this, just to apply the paint. So I'm just going to show you now underneath. You can see it's buckling there in the sort of bottom part as well. It's starting to, yeah, you can really see at the side there. But for a sketch, it's absolutely fine, really is. So I recommend this for sketching sort of thinner paper. And I'm just sort of showing you now, I'm applying another layer. Now I wouldn't really advise this now, especially not while it's wet. You might want to wait for it to dry and then apply the next layer. But really sketchbooks aren't meant for layers upon layers like we would use watercolour paper for. But I just wanted to show you that you can actually almost get away with it, and definitely if the paper was dry. But they are really for just one or two layers of washes, because normally a sketchbook would be a lot thinner than watercolour paper. You can get sketchbooks that are for watercolours, but even then they're slightly thinner. So just go on a smaller scale as well, so the paper doesn't buckle too much. As you can see here, there is a little bit of buckling, and as you can imagine, doing skies wet on wet or large areas, it wouldn't be too great because you'd have lots of wells of water. So I'm going to show you now some watercolour paper. This is 300 grams. It's a rough surface as well. It's really lovely. And I do recommend though for beginners though, if you go for a smaller pad of paper, even 7 by 10 inches, 300 grams with a cold pressed surface that's not as rough. A cold pressed surface is really nice. It's the most common as well, and it's also known as knot surface and knot paper, and that means it's not hot pressed. But as you can see here, I'm putting my paper through its paces there. There's no wells there at all. I'm just painting, and it's quite nice because it gives you lovely texture as well. The surface is quite beautiful, and it's made for watercolour painting, and it's just so much fun to paint on. If you do have larger sheets of watercolour paper, I really recommend, especially as if you're a beginner, is to cut it into smaller pieces. It will give you more time to paint as well, and you won't get as much buckling if the paper is thinner. And you can tape this down with either masking tape or framing tape. and it really gives you a nice white border but stops the painting from the paper curling up as well. I find Bockingford paper sometimes really curls once you wet it, never mind wells and sort of little puddles. It sort of has a mind of its own. You can see the back of the painting here, there are no wells like there were in the sketchbook because the paper is nice and thick, and as you can see the texture of there is lovely. I'm giving the painting a little spatter. It's nice and strong, this paper, so it allows me to kind of scratch into it as well, so it's very robust. The next thing I'd like to talk to you about is pencil marks. I don't mind pencil marks in my watercolour painting, I really don't, but a lot of my students don't like them, and I know a lot of the viewers and subscribers to my channel have asked what to do about them. So my motto is prevention is better than cure. So think about the pencil marks before you start painting on top of them. What I find is once you've got the pencil marks on your painting, okay, once you've got about 2 or 3 layers of watercolour on there, and once your painting is dry, when you try and rub off some of those pencil marks that are under the painting, under those layers, you can't remove them very well. And when you try to do it, you're actually removing some of the paint, because watercolour is not permanent, so you're kind of lifting off paint with your rubber, which is quite a nice technique, but maybe you don't want that. So if you don't want pencil lines showing through, this is what I would recommend. So I've got a little sort of cornflowers painting I've started here, and I've got some pencil lines on the left here. If I show you closer to the camera, you can see some pencil lines underneath the paint, because I used the HB pencil but I pressed quite hard, so I'm using a plastic eraser to rub off the pencil lines, hoping they'll come off. Now they actually did come off, but so did most of the sort of paint, the top part of the paint. As you can see on my rubber there, I've got some colourful sort of eraser pieces there. So what I would suggest you do when you've got something like this cornflower here and you've drawn it in, you may have traced it on, is just now gently rub off, so you've got like almost like ghost lines, as I've done in the centre flower there, so you can sort of barely see it, but it's enough there to help you with your painting, so that when you come to paint it, they'll be disguised. You won't see the pencil lines, because obviously I did sort of rub them off there. Sometimes they don't come off as well on that left hand one, but it did take the top surface of the paint off. So now it leaves me the freedom now to start painting on top, and the pencil lines will be disguised underneath because they'll be very pale. So I'm working on this larger one here, and I can't, once I start painting on there, I can't really see the pencil lines. So you might be thinking to yourself, well, that's not going to help me if I'm a beginner. I want to be able to see my pencil lines. The first washes that you do on a watercolour painting are very, very pale, so you'll be able to see them. So once you get those first washes on, they will be your guide to the next stage. And obviously you won't be able to see the pencil lines as well when you go through the painting, but then you'll have the painting marks. So I really hope you found this useful. But if you're like me, I don't mind the pencil lines unless they're really, I've left one where I've not actually painted over the top of it, I'll remove it. But in this instance here, it's all part of the painting, it's part of my creative process. So I hope that's helped you anyway. If you don't like them, you can sort of figure out and plan ahead if you don't want them to be seen, when you actually can rub them off with the plastic eraser or an ordinary rubber. Another really good do and don'ts is, and I've seen many students do this, okay, and I don't blame them, it's the immediate reaction. If you spill something, okay, you immediately want to mop it up, okay, it's that reaction. So when you make a mistake or you drip something or something happens in a watercolour paint, it's not supposed to happen, you get I've done this in demonstrations where I've sort of demonstrating with a big group, and suddenly a big blob comes from somewhere off my brush or on my palette or something. All my students are horrified usually, and I find it quite amusing, because I think, don't worry, it's fine. And the worst thing you can do is get a piece of paper towel and dab at it straight away. Don't do that. Don't do that. Once you do that, it presses the paint into the sort of grain of the paper, and it's very difficult to remove it after that. So what I would suggest is stay calm, get a clean brush, clean water, and put it on top of that, and just work at it with your brush, and I'll show you that now, and you can see how it will come off. I thought I'd show you me blow drying something where I shouldn't do because it's too wet to blow dry. And sometimes when you do this, I'm trying to force it, some of the paint will just shoot off like that. And it's actually a staining colour as well. That's permanent Quinacridone Magenta and Ultramarine. So what to do? Don't dab it with your paper towel. Just get some clean water and put it on the paint and really sort of tease it. Plenty of water and just kind of work into it. Okay. And just get that, get that water doing its job with the brush very sort of gently. And now lift off with the paper towel. Look at that. Now don't sort of lift off too much. Work into it again. Really kind of work into it till you've got it how you want it. Now I've created a little bit of a background there. That's why you shouldn't blow dry very wet paintings, by the way. But I'm just using some water now just to get rid of that line as well while it's still wet, and just smoothing and blending everything out with a damp brush, and then put a little bit more paint back in. Just damp into damp, so your brush is damp, it's not too wet, and the paper, the surface is damp as well. So I hope you found that useful in how to correct mistakes in watercolour. And the last tip I'm going to share with you, okay, and it's probably the most important, and I've left the best till last, okay, is my students, and I know I've had lots of questions from subscribers and viewers of my channel, is did you dry your painting? Have you dried your painting? Okay. I always dry my painting. I really do, between stages. I make sure it's absolutely dry, not nearly dry. And in fact, nearly dry is the worst time to paint on top of nearly dry paint. Because what happens is, once you put your brush on, and I will show you now, muddiness, backgrounds, all sorts of horrible things happen. So always make sure you dry your painting. Naturally is the best, it really is, because it just dries naturally. But if you don't have the time, a hairdryer, not too close, okay, and I'll show you what happens when you're too close with a hairdryer, it moves the paint. But make sure as well, before you blow dry, the shine has gone from the paper, so it's kind of drying. So really wait for your painting to dry and discipline yourself. Watercolour looks amazing when you let it dry and then you work on top. So what I'm doing here is just I've taped around the edge of my little swatch of watercolour paper with my framing tape. I'm using Ultramarine and Quinacridone Magenta, a pink and a blue, and I'm just painting this wet on wet with my size 10 brush, working my way down now to the bottom of the paper, still mixing up some of the ultramarine and the pink, and now I've added a bit of Quinacridone gold. You could use something like raw sienna if you wanted to have a little go at this, and added a little bit of blue to that as well. And the paint is slightly creamier now because I want it darker, so I'm painting sort of damp into wet, so the paint isn't as wet now. Just rinsing off my brush, and I'm just giving it a blow dry here. And this is a don't blow dry this when it's wet, because did you see that where it moved? And that's what happens, and that's the same thing that happened with my cornflower. The paint just shot across. You have to wait for the shine to go before you blow dry. And now I'm actually applying paint to this surface where I actually think it's dry because the shine has gone. It is deceptively dry. It's the worst time to paint. As you can see there, I've got back runs, and as I was painting, the paint was lifting off from underneath. So now when you're putting that next layer on, not only are you getting a back run because your underpainting is wet, so you're putting wet paint into a drying paint, but you're also reawakened that paint underneath. It's mixing with your top coat and it gets muddy. And as you can see there, as the painting dried, I've got an ugly sort of back run, the colours have got muddy. And if you just wait for your painting to dry and make sure you thoroughly blow dry it, you will get lovely sort of crisp transparent layers, not muddy, no back runs unless you want them, of course. And here I am now, I've mixed up some violet, well, I've mixed up some ultramarine and pink, and I'm painting wet on dry, not wet on deceptively dry, with my size 6 brush, and just painting some distant hills there. And but if you want to know how to paint a background, that's how you do it. You put wet paint into drying paint, and I'm just putting a little bit of a thicker wash underneath there and letting that dry. And I won't get a background there because the underpainting is dry, and you won't get muddiness because the underpainting hasn't been woken up. So I'm just removing my framing tape now to get a lovely white border, and here is the little painting here. And if you're a beginner, I would definitely recommend in painting on a small scale like that, simple paintings to start you off on your watercolour journey. I really hope you found this tutorial helpful, the do's and don'ts, and it will save you time, money and frustration. If you have any comments or questions about this tutorial, or if you would like to share any tips as well, or do's and don'ts, please put them in the comments section below, and I would love to hear from you, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. And remember, if you'd like to see more tutorials like this, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already to my YouTube channel. And if you'd like to see longer, more in-depth tutorials that take you through a step-by-step process where I explain the colour mixing, you've got access to downloadable templates for drawing, etc. It's ad-free, and you can cancel anytime. Check out my Patreon membership. Just click the link in the top right hand corner of this tutorial, or you'll find a link in the description below and it will give you more details. And again, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask me. I really hope you found this helpful. Thank you so much for watching and supporting me on my YouTube channel. I really, really appreciate it. Happy painting. Bye for now.